You're 29, standing in a courthouse corridor that smells like old paper and floor polish, holding a folder nobody else in the building would think twice about. The clerk barely glances at it as she processes the filing. Why would she bother? It's just another debt assignment, one of hundreds she runs through every week, the kind of paperwork usually reserved for collection agencies and men in cheap suits chasing restaurant owners over unpaid equipment leases. But this one's different, and you're the only person who knows it. Buried on page 11 is a legal description tying a defaulted $340,000 commercial loan to a lien on a piece of property sitting in the priciest stretch of your city's downtown corridor. You paid $6,000 for that debt. Nobody else wanted it. The bank wrote it off 2 years earlier, bundled it with a stack of worthless paper that changed hands 3 separate times before landing on a discount debt marketplace, the place where dying paper goes to be forgotten. You didn't buy garbage, you bought a door. That night you go home, and there's no celebration. You sit at your kitchen table and reread the promissory note, then the security agreement, then the recorded lien, cross-checking every page against county filings until 2 in the morning. You already know who the borrower is. Everybody in this city knows him, at least by reputation. He owns the building that houses the wine bar where the mayor hosts fundraising dinners. He's the type of man who gets parking tickets waived with a single phone call. He has no idea that a $340,000 default from a failed side project 6 years ago is sitting in a stranger's hands, wedged like a splinter into the deed of his crown jewel property. That night you write your first rule in a plain paper notebook. Never a laptop, because laptops get hacked and notebooks don't. Rule 1. Never buy debt for the debt itself. Buy it for whatever it's chained to. You think back to how all this started 4 months earlier. Unemployed, after a mid-level analyst position got dissolved in a round of layoffs, nobody even bothered explaining properly. You had $19,000 in savings and way too much free time. So you started reading up on distressed debt the way other people fall down crypto forum rabbit holes. You learned that businesses default constantly and quietly, and that most of that debt gets written off by banks with neither the time nor the appetite to chase it down. It gets bundled and sold for pennies on the dollar to buyers mostly interested in fast, ugly settlements squeezed out of frightened small business owners. Nobody in that world was paying attention to what the debt was actually secured against. Nobody was reading the fine print on the buildings. You were. Your first purchase was tiny, a note with a $4,200 face value against a shuttered dry cleaner, picked up for $310. You didn't chase the original owner for a dime. You didn't even call him. You quietly recorded your interest and waited, because Rule 2, written that same week, said patience is the only real leverage and nobody has against somebody. 3 months in, you'd refined the whole system into something closer to a machine. You built a spreadsheet cross-referencing charged-off commercial debt listings against county property records, hunting for one specific pattern. Distressed paper still legally attached to valuable, well-kept real estate owned by people who'd be mortified to lose it. You weren't hunting for slumlords with nothing worth protecting. You were hunting for reputation. Reputation was the lever. A slumlord will let a building rot before he panics. A man with a country club membership panics the second his name shows up in a courthouse filing. You start finding them one at a time. Quiet notes, each worth tens of thousands, secured against boutique storefronts, restaurant spaces, a dental office 2 blocks from the courthouse. Each purchase runs you a few $1,000s. Each one is a thread tied to someone who's never once imagined their empire has a soft underbelly made entirely of old paperwork. By month 5, you own 11 of these notes, having spent just under $61,000 combined. And the math of what you're sitting on starts to feel less like an investment portfolio and more like a ring of keys nobody else knows you're holding. You still haven't approached a single debtor. Rule 3, written in smaller handwriting like you were almost scared to commit it to paper. Never let them know you exist until the silence has already worked in your favor. Interest and penalties on defaulted commercial debt compound exactly the way they do on a credit card balance, except nobody's watching because the original lenders wrote these accounts off as losses years ago. The $340,000 wine bar loan, untouched and unpaid, has ballooned past $410,000 once accrued interest and fees from the original agreement are factored in. You're sitting on paper that grows more valuable every single month. You do absolutely nothing. The first real scare comes in month 6. A title company running routine due diligence for an unrelated refinance stumbles onto your recorded lien on the wine bar property and flags it for the borrower's attorney. Suddenly your name, the LLC name you used for the purchase, shows up in an email thread you're not part of, but somehow see anyway, forwarded to you by a broker who doesn't fully grasp what he's sitting on either. The attorney calls the number listed for your holding entity. You don't pick up, you never pick up. Rule 4. Silence isn't evasion. Silence is strategy. 2 days later, a certified letter lands at your registered agent's address, demanding to know the status of the debt and threatening a fraud investigation if you don't respond. Reading the forwarded scan, your stomach drops. Not because you've done anything wrong, every document is airtight, time-stamped, and properly recorded, but because exposure this early could unravel 18 months of quiet architecture before it's even finished being built. You do something you've never done before. You hire a real estate attorney, wiring her retainer from an account that traces back to nothing personal. You have her send back one calm, devastatingly precise letter, laying out the full chain of title, the original default, the recorded assignment, every date, every signature written in language so clean it reads like a closing argument you've already won. The fraud investigation threat evaporates within a week. Because there was never any fraud to investigate, just a wealthy man's shock at discovering that debt he'd assumed vanished into the void had actually been quietly bought up by someone patient enough to wait for the moment it would matter. You drive past the wine bar that weekend, order a glass of wine you don't really want, and sit close enough at the bar to hear him laughing with people who have no idea what's sitting 3 miles away in a courthouse filing cabinet with his signature attached to it. By month 9, you've grown from 11 notes to 26. Total face value creeping past $2.1 million once interest and recorded fees get factored in, all purchased for a combined $190,000. This is where the psychological shift begins. Subtle at first. You stop thinking of these men as people and start thinking of them as positions on a board, each one representing leverage you simply haven't cashed in yet. Your girlfriend asks why you spend so many nights at the kitchen table with a paper notebook instead of a laptop. You tell her you're studying for a real estate license. Technically, not even a lie. You did earn the license, mostly as cover, mostly because Rule 5 insists every serious move needs a boring, legitimate story sitting on top of it like a lid. Month 12 is when you make your first real play. The dental office 2 blocks from the courthouse now carries a note worth $94,000 with penalties, attached to an original $61,000 default from a failed second location the dentist opened and shuttered years earlier. You have your attorney file a formal notice of intent to foreclose on the lien. Not because you actually want the building, but because Rule 6 says leverage left unused is just a story you tell yourself. Within 11 days, the dentist's lawyer calls yours with a settlement offer. $140,000 cash to release the lien entirely and make the whole matter disappear before it becomes public record, searchable by any patient who Googles his name. You take it. You never wanted his building. You wanted proof the system worked exactly the way you designed it to. That settlement changes the pace of everything. You stop buying notes a few $1,000s at a time and start buying in bulk from debt marketplaces, negotiating directly with sellers who don't understand real estate the way you do, who see a spreadsheet of dead numbers where you see a map of a city's hidden pressure points. You hire a part-time analyst through a staffing agency, a recent graduate who believes she's helping a data consulting firm evaluate agricultural loan portfolios in some other state. She never sees a single address in your actual city. She never learns your real name, only the shell entity that pays her invoices. You tell yourself this protects her the same way it protects you, and some quiet part of you almost believes it. By month 16, you control 41 notes, spread across storefronts, restaurant spaces, 2 boutique hotels, and a parking structure attached to the building where the city's largest law firm keeps its offices. Combined face value crosses $6.8 million. Purchased all in for roughly $410,000. You still haven't met most of these people. You've never once raised your voice at any of them. Your name has never once shown up in a local paper. You've simply become the quiet architecture underneath a skyline built by people who assumed debt once written off no longer existed at all. Rule 7, written that same month. The people who built visible empires above ground have zero instinct for what's buried beneath it. And that blindness is the only edge a nobody actually needs. You start noticing the cost of the pattern you've built, the same way interest compounds quietly on a loan nobody's watching. You go to a friend's birthday dinner and sit across from someone complaining about a landlord dispute, and you have to physically stop yourself from asking which building, which entity holds the note, whether there's a lien attached that nobody's bothered to check. You catch yourself running numbers at funerals, at weddings, in the produce section of a grocery store, reflexively converting every building you pass into a question about what might still be legally chained to it. Power doesn't just hand you leverage. It rewires how your attention works until you can't look at a building anymore without seeing its skeleton. The second real threat lands in month 19, and it's sharper than the first. A commercial real estate journalist, the kind who writes long, obsessive columns about who actually owns what downtown, starts noticing a pattern of quiet lien releases and settlement payments, all tied to the same obscure holding entity. She starts making calls. She reaches your registered agent who, per your instructions, says nothing beyond confirming the entity is properly registered and in compliance. She reaches two of the building owners you've already settled with, both of whom, humiliated, decline to comment on record, which only makes her more curious. Your pulse stays elevated for the better part of 2 weeks. You seriously consider dissolving the entity entirely and rebuilding under a cleaner structure, the way you did once before, early on, over a smaller mistake. Rule 8 added that month. Exposure risk never fully disappears, it only gets managed. And the goal was never permanent invisibility, only invisibility that lasts long enough. You restructure anyway, spending $70,000 in legal fees to layer a new holding company between you and every active note, routed through a registered agent who's never once spoken to you directly. The journalist publishes her piece 3 weeks later. It names the holding entity. It does not name you. It circulates a few hundred times through local business circles, gets whispered about at the same fundraising dinners the wine bar owner attends, and then fades because nobody can locate the actual person behind the paperwork. And a story without a face rarely survives more than a single news cycle. By month 24, your portfolio of distressed commercial debt, all of it originally discarded as worthless by banks who never imagined anyone would actually read the fine print, has generated $9.4 million in combined settlements, buyouts, and lien releases against a total lifetime investment of just under $640,000. You still drive the same used car you bought 3 years ago. You still live in the same modest apartment because Rule 9, the one you underlined twice, warns that the version of you tempted into a lifestyle upgrade is the version of you that starts getting noticed. The elites whose buildings you've quietly touched never realize their stories intersect through the same buyer. Each one believes their own brush with the mysterious note holder was an isolated incident, a strange footnote in an otherwise smooth ownership history, when in truth you were the invisible hand behind nearly every uncomfortable phone call their lawyers made that entire year. At month 28, the biggest offer of your life arrives. Not for a single note this time, for the entire structure. A private investment fund specializing in distressed municipal and commercial paper has heard rumors, only rumors, of a portfolio too clean and too precise to have been assembled by accident. They offer $22 million for the whole book, structured across cash, plus a smaller earnout tied to remaining active liens. Your attorney handles every conversation. Your name touches none of it. That night, sitting in your apartment, you read the offer twice, then a third time, and you think back to that courthouse corridor 4 years earlier. The folder nobody else thought was worth carrying, the $6,000 gamble on a piece of paper the world had already thrown away. You sign the deal on a Tuesday morning, alone, in the same kitchen where the notebook still sits in a drawer, its pages full of rules nobody else has ever read. You think about the wine bar owner, laughing with friends who never learned his crisis had a face. You think about the dentist, the boutique hotel owners, the parking structure attached to the law firm. Every one of them convinced their brush with the past was random bad luck rather than architecture. You built an empire out of paper the entire city agreed was worthless, and you did it by understanding one thing none of them ever bothered to learn. Value doesn't vanish just because people stop paying attention to it. It simply waits quietly for someone patient enough to read the fine print. You sit there with the signed agreement in front of you. $22 million about to move through channels that will never trace back to your name in any headline anyone will ever read. And one question sits heavier than the number itself. If you can own the ground beneath a city's most powerful people without a single one of them ever learning your name, have you actually built real power at all? Or did you just borrow the illusion of it from people too arrogant to check what was still legally chained to everything they assumed they owned?